Good afternoon, everybody. It's Thursday, and my country has made no progress at all since Wednesday afternoon, so we are all stuck in election limbo for now. Allow me to share some of my favorite memes during this trying time. In all seriousness, I used to volunteer at the local polling place during every single major election, so I know that they actually count pretty fast, but then they have to recount and then double check, and this time around there are separate teams verifying signatures and triple checking the numbers, so it's bound to take longer. In reality, this is probably the safest election that I've ever witnessed in terms of cleanliness and counting, so hopefully all that effort pays off in the end. Anyways, I'm finally getting around to filming my October wrap-up. I did my last wrap-up in chronological order when I read the books, but then I noticed that several other booktubers tend to go in order of star ratings, and I like that idea, so I'm going to go ahead and steal it. So the lowest rating I gave this month was 2 stars, and that was to The Perfect Escape by Suzanne Park. This book is told through the perspectives of 2 protagonists, a Korean-American guy named Nate, who is a scholarship student at the local elite private school, and Kate, who's a rich white girl who didn't qualify in terms of academics for the elite private school, and therefore has to attend a public school instead. None of this is relevant because the 2 of them meet while working at a zombie escape room on the weekend. Nate is that host that takes you in and introduces the rules, and Kate plays a zombie. They're super into each other at first sight, but they don't want to embarrass themselves in front of each other, so there's a lot of fronting and banter and pining. Anyways, Nate wants to make money to help out his hardworking immigrant parents, and Kate is planning to run away to New York to get away from her overprotective tech CEO father. So they decide to enter this zombie survivalist competition, which is like a zombie escape room but on a much larger scale, where you compete against other teams and win prize money. It's also set up kind of like Hunger Games but less murderous. So you show up at this outdoor area and you have all of your gear ready, and then you proceed to try to get to the finish line ahead of the other teams. I thought this concept was a lot of fun, but the execution of the story was not so much. They don't actually get to the competition until much later in the book, so the first half is just them attending school and dealing with typical teenage problems and not so typical rich kid teenage problems. And then there's a section about relationship problems, and the whole thing took what I call a K-drama turn. And this felt really corny and melodramatic to me, so I wasn't a fan. Let's just say, if I wanted a K-drama plot, I would have watched a K-drama, so no thanks. Next! So we're on to the 3-star books now. My only actual 3-star title last month was The Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock. And I did an entire video review in this book alone already, so I'll skim over it here, but it's basically the story of 3 small towns, 2 in Ohio, 1 in West Virginia, and the people who live there. It's an ensemble cast, but I guess the protagonist is Arvin, who is a teenage boy whose parents have passed away, so he lives with his grandmother and great-uncle, and his adopted sister, whose parents also have their own depressing, messed up story arc. Everyone in this book has got problems. The descriptions of some of the scenes are absolutely disgusting. If you can't stomach detailed written descriptions of gross things, the Netflix film adaptation is actually much cleaner and brighter and less disgusting, so you can just watch that instead. There are so many trigger warnings for this book that I would say read it if you don't care about most trigger warnings. Otherwise, check all the warnings before you start. Next, I gave 3.5 stars to Anna K. A Love Story by Jenny Lee. I have heard many good things about this book, and I can kind of see why, but the whole wealthy teenage socialites in love thing just doesn't do it for me. I have a much longer review of this in my other video that's part of my Asian American YA series, which I still haven't finished filming because, again, procrastination, so I won't spend too much time on it, but basically it's a modern-day YA retelling of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. And I was never interested in Anna Karenina, but if you love that book, you'll probably like this book as well. I actually do have a fondness for modern-day retellings of classics like 10 Things I Hate About You, She's the Man, Clueless. I'm a huge fan of Clueless. So in terms of adapting a classic work for a modern teen audience, I think that Jenny Lee did do a pretty good job of that. I did like the characters, and I understand why they're into each other, but I really hate love triangles, and the majority of this book revolves around a love triangle and infidelity, so it was not for me personally. I also gave 3.5 stars to Turtle Under Ice by Juleah del Rosario. This whole book is written in verse, which is another thing that I detest because it reminds me of experimental writing workshops that I was forced to attend back in undergrad, back when I thought that I was meant to be a literature major. It's Kind of like that, but less jazzy and more tragic. The chapters alternate between 2 points of view, that of 2 sisters in high school. One is very quiet and withdrawn, and the other is a soccer star and has lots of friends. They're both coping with the death of their mother, who by all accounts is one of those badass women who love their careers and are always away on business trips. They mentioned that she never made it to their games and shows, but her death devastated them all the same. I'm going to stop here because I'll eventually have to film that final Asian American YA installment, so I'll go into more detail about this book there. But there were certain parts of this where I wasn't sure which character was talking, despite the chapter labels, because the voices are not as distinct as they could be. I found myself having to pay more attention to the hints they were dropping about their daily lives, such as the names of friends, in order to remind myself whose point of view I was reading from, which felt strange because the sisters are such opposite personalities that you'd think they'd sound totally different from each other, but that was not the case. Now we're moving to 4-star books. First up is Parachutes by Kelly Yang. This is another Asian American YA title set at yet another private school, and again told from alternating points of views of 2 protagonists, Claire and Danny. Claire is a parachute, which is the term used to describe rich Asian kids who get sent to the U.S. by themselves for school, while their parents continue to live in Asia. Claire's parents, who are part of Shanghai's high society scene, rent her a room in a house belonging to the other protagonist, Danny, who is a Filipino-American girl raised by her single mother who works as a cleaning lady. Danny is a student at the same private school that Claire attends, but she's there in scholarship, and she helps her mother by cleaning houses for her rich classmates after school, so they most certainly do not run in the same crowds. This book definitely delves into some hot-button issues that many young women, regardless of cultural and social background, are dealing with in real life, and I felt very angry on behalf of the characters because of the injustice of their situations. Kelly Yang, the author, grew up cleaning hotel rooms with her parents, and she went to Harvard Law later, where she was raped by a fellow student who got away with it because of how fucked up our justice system is. So she gets it. She gets what it's like to be poor and surrounded by peers who are super privileged, and she also understands the power structures that come into play when you decide to press charges and won't let sexual harassment and rape get swept under the rug. So needless to say, there are trigger warnings for sexual harassment by an authority figure as well as for rape, but it's not just used as a plot device or to create drama, which is so important when you're handling sensitive issues like this. Anyways, moving on, my next 4-star read is Telling Tales by Anne Cleeves. This is the second book in the Vera Stanhope series, and if you've seen my previous videos, you know that Vera is my favorite British murder mystery series. The books pretty much stand alone, though you'll get more of an idea of Vera's backstory and her platonic sibling-like relationship with her Sergeant Joe Ashworth if you read in order. There is a TV episode adapted from this book, but it's done quite differently, so I would recommend both reading and watching to really get the full experience. In Telling Tales, Vera and Joe are investigating a recently reopened case of a woman named Jeannie Long, who's been in prison for 10 years for killing her ex-boyfriend's daughter. At the beginning of the book, Jeannie has just committed suicide, and sudden new evidence emerges that proves her innocence. So Vera and Joe are brought in as an outside police investigation team to figure out what happened 10 years ago and who actually killed this girl. Since it's a mystery, I won't say any more, but I did like that Vera appeared earlier in this book than she did in the first one, where she didn't appear until 2/3 of the way through, and we just got the story from the perspectives of the other characters involved in the case, which was okay because I liked the characters in the first book. I didn't like the characters in this case as much because they were just unlikable people, but the mystery itself and Vera herself were awesome as always. My next 4-star rating is for Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. Again, I have an entire video review in this one, so I'll just say that it's a horror thriller novel about a young woman named Maggie who inherits a manor house after her father passes away. Her father is famous for a best-selling real-life horror novel about their family's experience living in this house back when Maggie was 5 years old. In the present day, Maggie no longer remembers anything about that time in her life, and she has a rocky relationship with both her parents, who divorced shortly after the book came out. She works as a house flipper, so she decides to return to the house to renovate it for sale and to investigate to see if her father was telling the truth in his book, and if not, then why did he lie, and why do both of her parents seem so reluctant to speak about what happened back then. There are alternating chapters from Maggie's point of view in the present day and her father's story from 25 years ago. I had to suspend my disbelief a bit during certain parts of this book, particularly later on, but there were so many twists and truly creepy and suspenseful moments that I overall enjoyed it a lot. Next is Fever Dream by Samanta Schweblin. This is an Argentinian psychological horror novel that I read translated into English. It's about a young mother who is currently dying in a hospital and is experiencing a fever dream in which she is having fragmented flashbacks about her daughter and the events that led to her being on her deathbed. There is a little boy sitting next to her who is the son of one of her friends, and he was there when everything went wrong, and he's asking her questions and prodding her to remember and tell her story before it's too late. The horror in this book is very quiet and understated, which makes it extra eerie, and by the end of it I still had all these questions, but the author doesn't bother to answer them, and I don't think she ever intended to answer them, but in a way that's part of what makes it creepy, because you're just as confused and plagued by this sense of wrongness as the narrator is, and I am definitely going to be reading more books from this author because I liked this one a lot. Next up is another book that I've already done a separate video review for, and that is House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. I adore this book. It is like a bowl of fresh, warm mozzarella sticks in that it's cheesy and makes your insides feel all gooey, but it's a good kind of feeling. The protagonist is a 40-year-old social worker named Linus Baker who gets sent to this island to check up on an orphanage housing 6 magical children who are considered too dangerous to be kept around other children, including other magical children. He is supposed to send back reports on the dude in charge, Arthur Parnassus, and see if the living conditions are up to par and whether the children themselves should be allowed to continue living there together under Arthur's supervision, unmonitored by the government. So Linus goes out there, he meets the kids, meets Arthur, becomes a part of their lives, and together they fight prejudice and ignorance, and the whole thing is just very hopeful and uplifting, and you should just read it, is what I'm saying. Okay, and now we have a bunch of 4-star graphic novels by Asian American authors, which I reviewed in my video on Asian American YA graphic novels already, so I'm going to just speed through them here. First, there was A Map to the Sun by Sloane Leong about 5 girls who join a new basketball team at their inner-city high school. They are coached by a new teacher who has never coached a team before and incorporates her coaching techniques from books and games that she's observed. Only 2 of the girls in the team have experience playing basketball, but it wasn't even formal experience. It was experience that they gained playing against each other on the streets, and only one of them has a future in the sport at all. But despite all that, they continue to learn and to get to know one another and support one another through all the various problems in their lives as low-income girls of color. Next, I have Flamer by Mike Curato. This is about a Filipino-American boy named Aiden who is enjoying his last summer before high school. It's set at the summer camp that he's attending with a bunch of other teenage Boy Scouts. The art is very simplistic, but I thought it was effective regardless. So it's just pencil sketches, but that didn't mean that I couldn't sense the emotions that the characters were feeling. This is a coming out story, sort of. Aiden doesn't come out to everyone, but he does come to the realization while he's at this camp that he might have feelings for his male friend. And he has a very hard time of it due to his Catholic upbringing and the homophobic teen boys that he's surrounded by, and the fact that it's 1995 and life was hard during the Dark Ages. There's trigger warnings for fat phobia, internalized homophobia, suicidal thoughts and intent. But that said, there are many funny laugh-out-loud moments in this book, and I liked it a lot. Next up, we have Shadow of the Batgirl by Sarah Kuhn. This follows Cassandra Cain, who is the half-Asian daughter of David Cain, an assassin and supervillain from the Batman comics. This first volume is her journey to becoming Batgirl. It goes into her struggles with trying to integrate into society and the friendships that she makes along the way with familiar characters like Barbara Gordon. It's a fun, typical comic book plot, and I will be reading the next installment. And now, my last 4-star book, Thinner by Stephen King. I said in a previous video that I would read this book because I had to know how the fuck things were going to go down after I saw that summary on Goodreads, and I did it, guys. I have never really been a Stephen King fan, but I enjoyed this book, which was very surprising. The main character is a hotshot lawyer named Billy Halleck, who accidentally runs over an old woman at the beginning of the novel, killing her and leading to a whole cover-up scheme by the local judge and chief of police, who are his friends. The victim was part of a Romany caravan that travels from town to town, performing and telling fortunes and selling trinkets to predominantly white tourists. Their presence is always tolerated in these towns for a couple of days at a time before the cops start looking for excuses to drive them out, and they have to keep moving. So crimes committed against them are often overlooked, and you get this idea that they're usually forced to take justice into their own hands if they want to see any justice at all. And that is the case here. As Billy is leaving the courthouse after he gets away with murder, the victim's father, who is the head of this Romany clan, comes up to him and touches him on the cheek and says, "Thinner." And after that, Billy starts to lose weight rapidly. At the beginning of the novel, he is morbidly obese and in danger of getting a heart attack, according to his doctor. And then suddenly he starts to lose weight, and before you know it, he's lighter than me, which is saying something because he's about a foot taller than I am. So the whole book is him dealing with his own condition, and his wife and daughter and friends just freaking out over what's happening to him, and then trying to find the caravan to save him. It also deals with upper middle class suburban problems. For example, Billy and his wife have marital issues. She chain smokes, the town doctor snorts coke every day before appointments, everybody's an alcoholic. There's also a lot of racism in this book. There are racial slurs everywhere. The Romany man that curses Billy is referred to as a gypsy in both the summary and throughout the book. And I think that's just because this book was published a while back. I highly doubt Stephen King himself is racist, and to be honest, I myself only recently learned that that word was a pejorative and ought to be avoided. Although somebody needs to tell TLC, because apparently they haven't gone on yet. I did have some problems with the way Stephen King talks about women in the book, particularly beautiful women, the way I do with most of Stephen King's other books, but it wasn't as bad in here as it was in The Gunslinger, so I thought that was good. And now finally we are at our 5-star reads. I gave 3 graphic novels 5 stars. I covered all of them in my graphic novels video, so I'll speed through them once again. The first one is Displacement by Kiku Hughes. The protagonist of this book, also named Kiku, is a half-Japanese, half-white teenage girl in 2016, right around the time of the US presidential election. She gets sent back in time to when her Japanese grandmother and great-grandparents were getting rounded up and sent off to an internment camp in the desert during World War II. This book is chock full of information on the Japanese-American experience in the internment camps, in particular the experiences of young Japanese Americans who wanted to resist, but were also afraid of possible consequences, and with good reason, because they were kept in a state of uncertainty on purpose by the government, and some people who were seen as possibly threatening were sent off to other possibly worse places, worse than the internment camps that they were already at. It was a really great read, and it was an excellent way to learn about that bit of history, regardless of your age. The next 5-star book I have is Superman Smashes the Klan by Luen. This is a Superman comic, obviously, but it's set in the suburbs after World War II and centers on the experience of a Chinese-American family that's just moved to town for the father's job. We get to see their attempts to assimilate by speaking only in English, the microaggressions from the father's colleagues and the other white students at the kids' school. And we see how that compares to Clark Kent's own experience growing up in a small town, trying to hide his powers and fit in. It's the story of being from an immigrant background and balancing the different parts of your identity, and also dealing with bigots like the Clan of the Fiery Cross. I loved the characters in here. I liked the Lee siblings, Tommy, and particularly Roberta, who Clark helps and who helps Clark in return. Lois is fantastic, and I liked Clark himself a lot more in here than I did in any of his movie appearances. And then we have another graphic novel by Luen, Dragon Hoops. This is a story of a high school boys basketball team. They're actually at a private Catholic school, but the boys are from different backgrounds, including non-Catholic ones, and most of them are POC. Gene himself is a narrator of the story. He is a fictional version of himself in here, writing a graphic novel about this team and their coach, Lou Ritchie. It's all very meta because the real-life Gene was also following this team to their games around California and out of state and gathering information for this graphic novel. What can I say? It's a sports story, and I'm a sucker for good sports stories. Gene does say at the beginning of the book that since this is based on real life, we might not get that fictional, triumphant ending we're used to getting from most sports fiction, but is winning really the point of it, everybody? You tell me. This is also a book about basketball overall. Gene goes into the history of basketball, the development of the sport and its rules, the integration of black players into the NBA, the evolution of women's basketball, so on and so forth. I learned a lot from this, and I enjoyed myself despite my dislike of basketball. Okay, we are at the end. The last 5-star book I read was a nonfiction book called Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Crematory by Doughty. I follow Doughty on YouTube. She is the Mortician from the Ask a Mortician channel, if you're familiar with that. I've always had an interest in funeral homes and crematories and the death business as a whole. In fact, it is my dream to be a part-time funeral home employee. Ideally, I'd work at my librarian job on weekdays and go to my funeral home job on evenings and weekends. There's a reality show on Netflix that I love called The Casketeers, and I really wish that I could be a part of that business. It's about a couple in New Zealand who run a funeral home, specializing in Maori and other Pacific Islander-style funerals, which deal with death in a much more up-close, personal way than funerals in the West tend to do. And Doughty herself focuses on that topic as well in this book. She goes into the history of the death business and how death used to be something that happened at home with family there, cleaning and dressing the body and staying with the body until the actual burial. But as time went by, the whole process of death became much more sanitized and commercialized. People tend to die in hospitals or nursing homes nowadays rather than at home, so it's easier to essentially shield the living from the whole process of death up until the body has been prepped and made up, all ready for viewing. And even at the cemetery itself, you watch the coffin get lowered sometimes, and then that cement mixer thing moves in and covers the coffin up. It's much cleaner, and I guess it's less creepy if you're afraid of that, and as a result we get in our heads that death is this big, scary unknown rather than just a natural part of life. Instead of properly planning for our deaths, we prefer to avoid the reminder that we'll die. I have had my funeral song picked out since I was in my teens, but I remember when my sister asked our mom what song she wanted played at her funeral, she flipped out. I think she was offended that we were already planning for her death while she was very much still alive and kicking, but that wasn't the case at all. In my opinion, if you don't pick your funeral song now, you risk other people picking a song that you hate or playing the wrong version of your funeral song. God forbid. I know I wouldn't want that, and I'd much rather tell everybody now so that they can properly prepare when my time comes. Oh yeah, so what's this book actually about? It's about how Doughty got her start in the funeral business, first as a crematory operator right after college, and then as a corpse delivery person, and finally as a mortician. I think she has several books out, and I plan to read all of them eventually because she's a very engaging writer, and she really makes you feel like you're there working in the crematory alongside her, and I learned a lot about the business. Okay, that is my entire list of books that I read in October. Are there any standout titles that you read in October that I can perhaps check out in November? If so, let me know in the comments below, and subscribe to get notified about my sporadic video uploads since I can't seem to stick to an upload schedule like everyone else. Anyways, hang in there, stay safe, stay sane, and I'll see you next time. Bye!